Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar today. This is Susan Schimpf with the Wallace Center speaking, and we are delighted to be joined today by Kristen Aguilar from La Semilla Food Center and Kelsey Ducheneau from the Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance. They'll both be sharing how their organizations are operationalizing their values around equity and empowerment by adopting alternative governance and leadership structures. This is a really interesting topic, and I think a lot of us have thought about this a ton, but maybe haven't acted on it. And so I really want to appreciate Kristen and Kelsey for sharing your insight with the rest of us today. Really looking forward to our conversation today. Also want to welcome all the members of the Food Systems Leadership Network who are participating in today's webinar. All right. So just real quickly, want to talk about what this series is all about. So earlier this year, as you know, we launched the Food Systems Leadership Network, and we've had an opportunity to connect with food systems across the U.S. and really hear about what you're chewing on and wrestling with as you do in your work in food systems development and food systems change across the country. And one of the things that we've heard a lot of interest in and curiosity about learning new or better ways of working and organizing and collaborating together, both within our organizations and in partnership with others. And many of us are really frustrated with the conventional and hierarchical organizational models and leadership paradigms that we've inherited from previous generations. And I think many of us are hungry for new approaches, models, and practices to build more equitable, resilient, and effective organizations that are really a lot more better positioned to lead change in our communities and our world. So since the Food Systems Leadership Network is really focused on building our capacity to lead food systems change, and part of that has to be about improving the effectiveness of our organizations, we started to shape up a learning question that we could explore through this webinar series. And that question is, how might we infuse the same innovative and community-driven spirit that we bring into our food systems work into our organizations to operationalize our social justice values, improve the quality of our work, and increase the quality of life for ourselves and our staff? And I found this lovely Calvin and Hobbes little bit that I think sums it up well, that really we have to walk the talk. And I think we all really want to enjoy our day-to-day work as well. And our day-to-day work is in our organizations. So let's explore that through this series. So today's webinar is the second of three. I think I needed more coffee today, or less coffee. Okay. This is the first webinar focused on organizations that are intentional about cultivating leadership within their staff. So we spoke with folks from Red Tomato and Thunder Valley CDC who highlighted inspirational leadership transition stories that I think we really can all learn from. The archive from that webinar can be found on ngfn.org and also on the FSLN Digital Community of Practice under courses. In the next webinar, which is 2 weeks from today, we'll hear from several of our movement's most successful networks and alliances, including the Center for Regional Food Systems, Farm to Institution New England, and Hawaii Good Food Alliance. Please note that you'll need to register for each of these webinars, so we'll provide the registration links in the chat box. So register today for that final course. Okay, so let's get into it. It is my great honor to introduce Kristen Aguilar from La Semilla Food Center, which works in the Paso del Norte region of southern New Mexico and El Paso, Texas. I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Kristen and La Semilla over the past year or so, and back in March at our conference in Albuquerque, we learned a little bit about La Semilla's shared leadership model and really wanted to learn more. So that conversation that we had back in Albuquerque was one of the inspirations for us putting together this series. Kristen is the co-director of admin and policy at La Semilla, where she oversees all policy advocacy efforts and financial and administrative functions of the organization. Kristen led the initiative to get the Las Cruces Urban Agriculture and Food Policy Plan passed and is now leading efforts for a county-wide healthy food financing initiative. She is one part of a 3-woman leadership team driving La Semilla's mission of creating a fair and sustainable local food system and riding on the frontier of nonprofit development with an innovative leadership model, holistic programming, and using food systems work as a tool for racial and gender healing. Thank you so much for being with us today, Kristen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that introduction. I'm really excited for this opportunity to talk a bit about what we've learned at La Semilla about shared leadership over the past several years. I want to acknowledge that this is an ongoing process, and maybe always will be. We definitely learn a lot from other resources and folks doing similar work, and we really appreciate them. So La Semilla is a nonprofit whose mission is to create a fair, sustainable, healthy local food system in the Paso Norte region. As Susan said, we work in southern New Mexico and El Paso, Texas. We're a social change organization focused on root causes of inequity in the food system, and our work happens through programming and policy work. We work through food access, education, and focus on community-based economic development, focusing on getting food and farm-based resources and capital to communities that have generally been cut off from those things. Our programming includes a 14-acre community farm, a mobile farmers market bus, community cooking and garden education, school-based edible education, food and farm business development, and policy advocacy. La Semilla was founded in 2010 as an organization with shared leadership, so with 3 co-founders that were also 3 co-directors. Throughout the 8-year history of the organization, there have been a few different iterations of shared leadership, some of which worked very well and some that we definitely learned a lot from. Currently, we're a staff of 19 and have 3 co-directors, one of whom is an original co-founder. The other 2 co-founders moved on from the organization at different points over the past few years. I came on board in 2012 as the policy coordinator, taking on increasing leadership and responsibilities, and have been a co-director since January 2017. Currently, the 3 co-directors are all women of color. Now, before I jump into this, I want to say that this is not a presentation on how we've perfected shared leadership. I'm not sharing this because we're experts in the field, but because we think shared leadership is fundamentally important in rethinking and revisioning the nonprofit industrial complex and the current systems that dictate this kind of work. We've made a lot of mistakes and a lot of innovations. We've had really rough patches and times of just blinding success. Being transparent and honest about the process is the only way forward, in my opinion, so that as a sector and as a society, we can move the needle forward to greater equity. I want to talk briefly about why we think a shared leadership model is important to us personally as an organization and why it's important to the nonprofit field in general. When we talk about shared leadership, what we're really talking about is analysis of power structures, right? If our work is rooted in equity, then the way we operate has to be reflective of that. A lot of times equity is about being brave enough to step back from power, from speaking loudest. If we're really serious about analysis on intersectionality and power, then we have to practice that on a day-to-day basis. I think it's quite clear that all nonprofit work, and really just life in general, right, is relationship-based. Fundraising, outreach, programming, work and organizational culture, it all comes back to creating sincere and meaningful relationships. And shared leadership both requires a good and meaningful relationship building and also allows us to constantly practice those relationship building skills. Another important aspect of shared leadership is the way it can assist with transitions, both within and away from the organization. We think it's important and creates a stronger organization as a whole if we focus on cultivating leadership and professional growth from within our community and within our organization. We've been able to successfully weather a few transitions in leadership because of the focus on this shared leadership across all programs and all aspects of our organization. This focus also creates a stronger organization overall, right, with staff that are capable and empowered to guide and shape programs and operations. A lot of times people, like say board members or funders, will have questions about the effectiveness or viability of shared leadership structures. Concern is generally from the unknown. So for example, concerns about legal risk might be brought up, but really this is mostly because we've just become accustomed to the legal risk of a corporation or nonprofit with a single executive director. Risk is still there, it's just the risk that we know. Shared leadership doesn't present any real additional legal risk, The nonprofit quarterly has a few fantastic articles on shared leadership. One in particular is from May 2017 called Shared Leadership, A Lawyer's Perspective. The article has a lot of great points. I mentioned a couple, and one central point is to define and clarify roles and expectations before issues arise. And really, that's good advice for any organization, but it's advice that's really central to effective shared leadership. Oftentimes, shared leadership will be seen as dividing up one job among 2 or 3 people. So you just have less work, same pay, but that's just not the case. Shared leadership doesn't create less work, it's just as much work, but it's a different kind of work. So as a co-director, I'm able to do more, but I have to do it all more thoughtfully. Shared leadership really is a relationship, one that's as real as any personal relationship, which means that it always takes work and that it must be thoughtful, open, and communication is key for it to be a healthy relationship, which is the ultimate goal. One concern that often comes up is, but who's going to make the final decision? And again, this is just a symptom of being used to hierarchical structures and systems. Decisions can and have been made for eons without being a decree by a single all-powerful individual. Even conventional organizations with a single executive director have various ways decisions are made and input is gathered. Decision-making isn't inherently hindered by shared leadership, but again, there must be clarity and open communication. You'll note that clarity is something I've said and will continue to say a lot, and that's because it's really central and key in shared leadership. I'm going to talk a bit about our organizational structure, though I do hesitate a little. Organizational structures, I like to think of them like job titles. They're a tool, not the tool. One necessity of operating a nonprofit specifically, I think particularly in this day and age, is the ability to be flexible and adaptable, which means that our structure shifts over time. It's not realistic to think that once we find the one perfect structure, we'll be good to go and not have to change anymore. Hoping for that's futile and it can be detrimental to your organization. Change is good, it's necessary, it's inevitable. So learning how to embrace and adapt to that is key, which of course all requires clarity and clear communication. Flexibility won't work if people aren't clear about expectations and delineation of responsibilities for any given situation. That doesn't help create a stronger staff, that kind of hinders them a little bit if there's not clarity. Having said that, here's a graphical representation of how our organization is structured currently. So the 3 co-directors are represented here by blue. Our direct reports are somewhat grouped by area. So for example, Cristina Dominguez, our co-director that oversees all farm aspects, is the direct supervisor of farm staff and farmer marketing staff. It's important to note a couple of things. One is that while everyone does have a direct supervisor and even co-directors are accountable to each other, mentorship occurs across and between all co-directors and staff. And 2, we don't focus on shared leadership just at the top, even if this is maybe what this looks like. In various ways, leadership is shared across programs and across the organization as a whole. I also want to talk briefly about how we actually operate on a day-to-day basis, which the basic graphical representation doesn't really get at. So take, for example, our leadership team. In addition to the 3 co-directors, our grants and special programs point person, Deborah, is part of the leadership team. I'll talk a little bit more about that and how we define and delineate co-directorship versus leadership team on the next slide. Another example of a team is shown here at the bottom left. Our market and education assistant splits her time between assisting with the mobile farmers market and assisting our community education team with youth activities. This means that our community ed program and our mobile market program work closely together depending on the activity. And this is just one example. We have multiple crossovers and teams across the entire organization. One of the major reasons for this cross-programmatic work is because each of our staff members have varied interests and skills that they bring to our organization. We want to be able to apply those skills for the benefit of our community and our organization, and we also want staff to feel fulfilled and energized, making sure they have the opportunity to expand and stretch their skills and interests is incredibly important. So to go back to our co-director structure and leadership, I want to show you how we envision co-directorship at LASMIA. We came up with what we think of as core shared responsibilities that are imperative to carry as a co-director. So these include community-based understanding, fiduciary responsibility, nonprofit knowledge and innovation base, external relations, food systems grounding and understanding, board relations, driving the mission, and organizational knowledge and history. So in order to be a director of the organization, this is the mental and emotional load that has to be carried. The great thing about shared leadership is that all of these really important pieces are carried by 3 brains instead of 1. Burnout in the nonprofit field is very, very real, and particularly so among executive directors. So, for example, being responsible for the livelihoods of 19 people can be incredibly heavy and wearing, but being able to share that, to have the support of people who are committed and dedicated to the same outcome as you is absolutely priceless. Of course, that's still a significant amount of mental energy to hold space for these things. So that's why we also have our leadership team. If someone doesn't have the time or energy needed to dedicate to directorship, but still has invaluable skills and experience, their voice is still heard through that leadership team. So in addition to the shared responsibilities, each co-director also has their own hat to wear. For example, I oversee all of our policy advocacy work and oversee grant and financial management. Christina oversees all aspects of farm and marketing and many programmatic activities, and Beverly oversees fundraising, events, and bookkeeping, admin, and operations. The way we think about decision-making generally, and among the co-directors particularly, is taken from concepts from the book Reinventing Organizations. There's a decision to be made, the person most closely linked to the decision or the person with the most energy, skill, and experience will make the decision. They do this by talking to and getting advice from people who, 1, are significantly affected by the decision, and 2, people with expertise on the subject. And then voila, decision's made. So obviously this can be a messy process sometimes. Sometimes it's really quick and straightforward, and sometimes we do a lot of talking for quite some time. But the benefits can be really quite incredible. Again, it's a case of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, right? People working or making decisions in a team can come up with ideas and innovations that would never come to fruition with one brain, no matter how great that brain is. I wanted to share a few tools and best practices that we've found tend to help shared leadership work better. So we have weekly leadership meetings, or mostly weekly. We'll adjust based on schedules, time of year, other considerations, but for the most part, we try to stick to weekly. This is helpful so we all stay updated and on the same page about things that are happening and get any support that we need. Organizational culture is incredibly important. Making sure all staff feel empowered, fulfilled, and cared for creates a space where shared leadership and other ideas and structures and innovations can flourish. And again, open communication and clarity are absolutely key. Some of the most difficult times the organization has weathered has been because of lack of communication, clarity, or trust. We're constantly practicing this. We are not always successful, but the important thing is that each of us is dedicated to making it work. So if we fail one day, we come back the next day and do better. We try to show up as our best selves, and when we can't, we say that out loud, right? Like, I am not my best self, and I am not going to be helpful at all in this today. So in addition to holding each other accountable consistently, we also have grace for each other, right? Both are important. And we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. This is ridiculously important. If you're a leadership team with 1 woman of color, 1 white male, 1 person who identifies as queer, you better be sure you're ready to have those uncomfortable conversations about all the isms. A great article in the Nonprofit Quarterly, again, interviewed people from different organizations that were practicing shared leadership. The vast majority, literally almost all of them, identified as people of color and or LGBTQIA. So this isn't to say it's impossible to have shared leadership and uncomfortable conversations if you're a team that's half white, half people of color, or any other combination of privilege or ability, etc. But I do think it highlights the fact that some groups are forced and therefore used to uncomfortable conversations because power dynamics and privilege are real, and this will play out in a shared leadership situation. It can be overcome and worked through, but it will happen. Like I said at the outset of this presentation, we're still learning a lot about shared leadership and how best to operate within that. I just want to reiterate what I find are the most important topics and things learned from shared leadership. Clarity, it's so important. Clarify those roles and responsibilities and what directorship means to your organization, because it'll be different for every organization. Trust, you have to have or build trust among co-directors for this to work. Again, those uncomfortable discussions, they may be hard, but we're all the better for it in the process and in the end. And to add to that, make sure you have an understanding of intersectionality and power structures. You need a common language and common grounding from which to start the work, basically. So with that, I will say thank you all for letting me talk to you all today about shared leadership and answer any quick questions that we have right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. I really appreciate just your transparency about the ups and downs of the process and y'all's true and sincere commitment to that. Just really appreciate your honesty there. A couple of questions that came in. One question from Aaron asking if the co-directors are all full-time or if y'all split a 40-hour work week.
No, we are all full-time.
Okay, and then in terms of budgeting, is there she's asking if there's what's the budget to support the 3 co-directors? Is that something that's developed at the organizational level annually? And you know, if you want to, we could follow up with answers to some of these questions as well. Right.
Yeah, our budget is decided annually. The board obviously sets the 3 co-directors. We act basically as, and our relationship to the board is similar to what an executive director would have. So the board sets our salary, and then we, as an organization, work and set our organizational budget each year as well. One thing about pay, we do strive to be as equitable as possible in our pay structure. So we have a few guidelines that I could share offline too about that.
Great, thank you. Here's an interesting question from Gil. Why director and not leader or manager? Any insight on the choice of that word?
Yeah, so we have talked ourselves into circles about titles and what that means and who is what. Some of our program managers right now really are acting more as program directors. They don't have that title because we have 3 co-directors, right? So we've talked about what is and isn't in a name. Sometimes there's a lot and sometimes there's nothing. And we evaluate it as we go along to make sure that it's reflective of what we do, but also understandable to others outside of the organization as well. So it's not something we have settled. And the reason it's co-directors, just because at this point, like, that's how it was founded. And it's the best way in our minds to get across that shared leadership so far. But probably something we'll be talking through a lot more as we go forward.
Yeah, and I was curious to know how you orient new staff to this shared leadership model.
Right.
And there's kind of a related question here just about some of the specific ways that organizational culture is supported and reinforced.
Right. So with our new staff, actually, the majority of our staff, this is their first professional job. So we don't have to unlearn a lot of bad habits, right, from conventional organizations. A lot of this is practiced, like I said, throughout the organization. So program managers will work with program assistants, and they're making collective decisions about the organization. We tell people, right, and share new staff, like, this is what it is and this is how it operates. I think you could say that multiple times, but seeing it in practice actually really helps and is what gets the point across and helps people become oriented. It's a fine line to walk between supporting and mentoring new staff or staff who have never had a professional job before, and orienting them, setting schedules, and then sharing leadership and allowing flexibility. And that's something that we continually navigate for sure to figure out how we do that. Organizational culture, I think, is based It both supports and requires, or supports shared leadership and allows it to flourish, but then practicing leadership and sharing it across the organization just in itself creates a good culture, I think. We make sure that staff know that they're completely supported. We do our best to have a flexible work environment and really good benefits and a lot of pieces in place to support staff in their professional and personal development.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I know there's like questions just rolling in, but we're going to just pause here and then we can go deeper after our next presentation. So thank you so much, Kristen, and we'll see you in just a little bit. So Annalena, my colleague at the Wallace Center, brought our next presenter to our attention after learning about the Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance at National Farm to School Network's biennial conference back in April. Annalena was inspired by the intentionality that the Alliance places on true youth engagement and organizational governance, and not the tokenism which many organizations are guilty of. So we're excited to learn more today from Kelsey Ducheneau, who is the Youth Programs Coordinator and Natural Resource Director at the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the IAC, which is the fiscal sponsor for the Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance. Kelsey accepted the position as IAC's Youth Programs Coordinator just 6 years after participating in a high school youth gathering, which the Intertribal Agriculture Council incorporated into their national membership meeting in 2009. Kelsey's position connects her with youth from across the nation to coordinate and facilitate local, regional, and national youth leadership development opportunities. She carries the hope of inspiring the next generation of tribal leadership to recognize the importance of food and agricultural systems as a key to each community's health, economic development, and sustainability. Kelsey is a fourth-generation rancher and small business owner who calls her family ranch on the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation home. She received a Bachelor's of Science in Range Sciences in 2015 from South Dakota State University and a Master's of Agriculture from Colorado State University in 2017. And she's currently preparing to start her doctoral studies this fall. Kelsey, thank you so much for being here with us today. You can take it away.
All right, thank you so much to the Food Systems Leadership Network for having me. As it was mentioned earlier, my name is Kelsey Ducheneau. I am from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota. I started my work with the IAC, and I will go to the mat and argue that I have the best job out there. I'm really fortunate to get to do the work that I get to do. Today I want to share a little bit of the organizational structure that exists with the Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance. And do I have control? Okay, there we go. The Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance, NIFSA for short, is working to reconnect sustainable food systems through youth leadership development. The NIFSA is really waiting for the webinar. Okay, there we go. NIFSA is a youth-led movement of the Intertribal Agriculture Council. So we've reached over 600 youth from more than 150 tribal nations with our youth programming so far as the IAC. And really what we've realized as we've opened up doors for opportunities for youth to expand on their leadership is that we had to step out of the way a little bit. So much so to the point that we had a couple of young leaders from Cheyenne River that interned in our Great Plains office come to the table and say, hey, the IAC has a national board of directors. We want a youth board of directors. So a couple years in the making is NIFSA. In November of 2017, we actually sat our inaugural board of youth board of directors, and we have really, really enjoyed seeing the success of what they've accomplished in their first year. A little bit of background on NIFSA is they are a group of 12, sorry, my buttons are sticky. All right. The Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance is a group of 12 young leaders from across Indian country, across the United States, that are really working to bring their regional concerns to the table at a national discussion, and also taking national opportunity back to their regional youth and making sure that their youth within their region have access to those opportunities. NIFSA's vision, they envision culturally appropriate, sustainable, and self-sufficient food and agricultural systems in Indian country and around the world. They have identified their core values as culture, unity, and resiliency. So really, since the formalization of leadership in the late 2017, NIFSA board members have really been busy bossing me around. No, what they've been doing is an outstanding job of enhancing a structured framework to back the mission of IEC youth programming, as well as expanding our scope of work to better equip the next generation of Native leadership. Like I said, have the best job in the world because I get to sit back and really watch the development of an organization that I feel like is going to shape a more prosperous future for Indian country. Sorry, keep skipping 2 on me. All right, so NIFSA serves to educate and empower Indigenous youth to be agricultural innovators for generations to come. The 12 board members are actually between the ages of 18 and 24. They're each assigned one of 12 regions from across the United States to represent, and they come together to work on making progress in their efforts on a monthly meeting, which is entirely online. So they have a lot of flexibility built into the structure. They are what I would call experts in online data and information sharing. Their monthly meetings are held via Google Hangout, and they have all of their resources available on Google Documents. So many links between all of their documents. It's just insane watching them work. They are also busy college students or busy really community leaders. So they do everything that they can to ensure progress continues to go on beyond the meetings. They have group text messages going on, online Google Forms for voting to be carried outside of the meetings, really innovative and efficient ways to keep progress going beyond their busy schedules. So they have a structure of leadership, which really, we're in our first year, correct, is still getting formalized. So I tried to design a picture which would depict how the leadership roles are shared, and this is the best that I can come up with right now because they're still defining it. They're doing a really good job of making sure that there's a shared level of responsibility up and down and a connection with the mission and the vision of the Intertribal Agriculture Council. So the best way that I could come up with putting an outline around the NIFSA organizational structure is a triangle, really because we have 3 movements in which we are trying to provide opportunity to our youth. We have the local, regional, and national level opportunities which the IAC works to support for NIFSA. They have self-elected a chairwoman, Carly Moore of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, and she has 2 co-vice chairwomen which assist in everything that she's doing, and in this first year of development, that's a lot. And they've decided that the leadership that should be shared here with the vice chairwomen is 1 being focused on internal affairs and all of the committees that exist on the board of directors, and an external affairs co-vice chairwoman, and she is focused on the partnerships liaisons. I'll touch on what a partnership liaison is in just a little bit. And then really we have the IEC Board of Directors. You'll notice in that box there is a voting delegate. It's the same gray color as the chairwoman and the co-vice chairwoman. And down here in the lower right-hand corner of that triangle is a missing chunk. So the voting delegate sort of transplants from the NIFSA Board of Directors over onto the IEC Board of Directors to make sure that the youth's voice does have that national scope and that there is representation in the IEC Board of Directors future leaders in how they carry out their business and how they continue to expand their programming in the future. The IAC actually has designated 1 role or 1 voting seat to an elected official off of the NIFSA board. We have yet to identify another organization which has reserved a seat on their board for a individual between the ages of 18 and 24 that has a national voting level. So we're pretty proud of that. We really do believe in the fact that our youth are the future, and I think that has been at the source of shaping the progress that we've seen within this movement. So some of the shared roles, leadership for the most part is self-identified. Now the current board will determine how they phase out into the next board, if that's going to be a staggered approach or if it's going to be an entire turnover in 1 year. And then the selection committee also for passing on that leadership role is responsible for ensuring that appropriate progress is made on the projects prior to handing them off onto the people who are going to carry them up and take them further. Committees that they have established so far is the fundraising committee, the public relations committee, recruitment committee, and the website committee. So in the first few years of an organization, you can understand how these would be 4 very critical committees. And then the partnership liaisons. The youth recognize that it is incredibly important to rely on the network and the reliability of organizations that have been in existence a little bit longer. And so they're doing what they can to navigate their networks and their involvement with organizations beyond NIFSA and the IAC to identify partners. And we are looking for partners. So if your organization is interested in the work that NIFSA is doing, feel free to reach out to us and let us know how we can work together a little bit on some initiatives. All right, so inclusive membership. The 600 youth across more than 150 tribal nations has come by way of us opening our doors to any Native youth that are interested in our opportunities and us doing what we can to ensure that they have access to participate. We really do not believe in youth having to turn down an opportunity to learn or grow as a leader because they do not have the resource to do so. So that is where partnerships, again, come in so handy to make sure that we are able to share these resources with youth, no matter what their background is or where they're coming from. We are seeking involvement from youth from all communities through the local, regional, and national events. We have youth leadership development opportunities that the NIFSA Board of Directors assist us in coordinating from the tribal level to the regional level, and then again at the national level. So at the regional level, really what we focus on is enhancing youth networks. So thinking back even to my high school opportunity, I had no chance really of getting to meet youth from other tribal nations within my region. And the Great Plains region is pretty small. It's South Dakota, North Dakota, and Nebraska, as defined by the Bureau of Indian Affairs Regional Alignment. And I didn't really know a whole lot of youth from tribes other than Cheyenne River. So if we're able to equip youth with a network across their reservation boundaries, they're going to be so much more prepared for what comes after high school, for what comes with their first time of employment, and they have to pick up a phone call and call someone randomly for the first time. And we also work to encourage tribal involvement. It's really critical that we have buy-in from the community leaders that these youth are going to engage with when they return home. And also, it's in some communities time to tell them to step up and to innovate their game a little bit and to improve access to opportunities for the youth that are living in their communities that they're supposed to be serving. We also work to ensure accountability of allies. So we see a lot in this sector of work, individuals who want to help, but perhaps think that the only way to help is through the solutions that they have identified. And really what is the case is that we need people to be willing to listen to the communities and to ask questions and figure out what the community identifies in needing in order to move beyond their current status. We also are doing our best to offer opportunity. Like I said, it's been said often that, just look for the door and opportunity will knock. For a lot of youth in a lot of tribal communities, in any impoverished communities really, there's no door that's ever been built for opportunity to knock on. So it is our responsibility, we feel, and the NIFSA board feels, to build as many doors as we can. We also are incredibly focused on equipping youth with the ability to make an impact locally. The importance of equipping youth with skills they can take home really overcomes any curriculum or data set that we could put in front of anybody, because we need them to be the movers and shakers in their community. Resources within this sector are usually incredibly limited, and so if we have access to young, able leaders and we don't equip them with skills that they can take home and employ, was it really the best use of the resources? And so our focus is always on leadership development. We feel as though if we can showcase the importance that careers in food and agriculture have on any one individual's life, whether that be the clothes you're wearing, the building you're sitting in, or the food that you just ate for lunch, the youth sort of attract themselves to a career in food and agriculture. What we focus on building into that instruction and that curriculum is the relevant youth leadership skills that they will need: how to effectively network, how to have communication, how to make yourself stand out in the crowd, public speaking skills, ways to seek opportunity and make sure that you can follow up with individuals who are going to be able to help you get to where you need to be. We are creating the next generation of national policy advocates. In addition to the 16 regional events that we've had so far since 2016, we have been a partner in 13 national youth leadership development opportunities. And we've also been engaged in 10 what I would call allied events. So we kind of are creating this hub of young, engaged youth leaders from Indian country that we get kind of tapped into every once in a while, I guess, for lack of better terms. When people are interested in having these young leaders come represent their organization or support their cause, they'll give us a call. We've been able to partner with some events in the past for having our youth go to the Hill and lobby for the Farm Bill and the importance that it will have in Indian country. We've also had youth talking with tribal leadership at the National Congress of American Indians conference, trying to get them excited about the Farm Bill and focusing on the real world impact that the Farm Bill will have on our food systems within our tribal communities if we are not at the table having a say in how this national policy will trickle down and make its way into our communities. Why are we seeing success? I've kind of put some bullet points together here, and I'm going to try not to touch base too much on the things that Kristen already mentioned in hers, but some things that I think are important to point out is our programming and our organizational structure is peer-to-peer. So having a youth serve as a peer leader or a presenter is absolutely critical in our curriculum or material being retained. We've seen an exponential difference in the same curriculum being presented by a youth's peers and by an adult or somebody that's older than the youth. Students just love to learn from their peers, youth do, and it really helps elevate the leadership of the presenter, the youth that is involved on this side of the microphone too. And when you are engaging youth and equipping them with more leadership responsibility, responsibility is an honor. It's not a chore. It's not a thing that comes along with the job title. It's something that they get to do. Youth are sought for their expertise and their knowledge, and they're recognized as young leaders. And as a result, the elevated responsibility really is experienced and perceived as an honor. It's nothing that they have to do because they're stuck with doing it. One example of this is I do not refer to any of the youth in our programming as kids. I've really tried to cut out the word kids in my day-to-day life at all, because a lot of times kids don't get to be kids in these impoverished communities that we're all trying to impact. And they all, by the time that they go to school, have earned the respect of a young adult because they're trying to do what they can for their family by the time they're going to school. So I refer to them as youth, and they really do, that small change is something that they respect. Similarly, transparency or translucency is a privilege. It's not a requirement. So it's really easy to have the youth board want to share what the IAC board is, or want to share to the IAC board, and to have the voting delegate bring the IAC's meeting agenda back to the board and share it with the overall membership. Our primary focus is on leadership development. Like I said, we have found that we can offer exposure to the importance of a career in food and agriculture, and youth really take to it like wildfire. It's equipping them with leadership skills and employable skills that is absolutely critical. Flexibility is key. So virtual meetings, are they a hassle? Yes. Does the internet stink sometimes? Absolutely. Is it hard to stick to the agenda? Yep. But flexibility is what makes it all work. And when it comes to getting any sort of youth involved in any realm of opportunity, flexibility absolutely has to be key, because we get accustomed. I heard Kristen say earlier, we get accustomed to a certain way. We kind of become institutionalized into what we think that an agenda should look like, or how a meeting should go, or how a webinar should be performed. And it prevents any level of creativity or innovation from flourishing. When you remain flexible in engaging with a board of directors or a youth group, it allows for that creativity and that innovation to break through. Another reason we're seeing success is complexities don't scare us. We recognize that in the very high needs communities that we're trying to impact, complexities are a requirement, actually. We have to tap into an elevated amount of resources. We have to network with even more people in order to make sure that we are able to solve the problems or present more opportunities to the communities that need it. And largely, the biggest reason that the NIFSA board is seeing success is the shared support and resources of the Intertribal Agriculture Council. Referring back to that diagram a little bit ago, I am hired underneath the IAC, and fortunately, my job allows for me to kind of put some fuel into the car that the NIFSA board is creating and drive it every once in a while, and share the network that the IAC has equipped me with to make sure that their initiative and their movements are being really explored by all those that are interested. And without the resources of the IAC, we would still be trying to build up from ground zero with the NIFSA board. I think that's important for us for all on the call to remember. We have to share our resources across that boundary of our organizational chart, because we're not going to be able to do as much good as we can if we're not sharing those resources and expanding those networks. So looking forward, how do you support the Alliance? We are having our annual membership meeting in Las Vegas, Nevada, December 5th through the 8th. We have, in addition to our annual gathering of Native American producers and food growers, the Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance Conference. Last year, we brought 80 youth from 35 tribes to the table to talk about solving the question of food sovereignty and how do we feed ourselves. You can also find us on Facebook, and you can email us. Please, please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions that you may have beyond this call. And I think with that, it's actually time for me to maybe take a few questions right now.
Yes. Wow. Kelsey, thank you so much. I'm so inspired by the fact that this exists. Honestly, I really just want to commend you and the youth and the Intertribal Agriculture Council for having the vision to like really make this happen. I was getting chills as you were talking about the potential impact and the current impact on these youth's lives. So I just really appreciate you sharing your work with us, and really excited to see it grow in the years to come. There's a couple of great questions here, and one of which is, about the relationship between the youth representative and the rest of the Intertribal Ag Council's board.
Mm-hmm.
How do you monitor and manage the inevitable power dynamic at that level?
I think the great thing about our local and regional youth leadership development opportunities is we try to equip skills with the ability to see past that power dynamic. And we share with them the fact that as long as you can tap into the confidence that you have the right to exist in whatever room you find yourself in, then they're able to really work across the table from some of the most powerful people in the country.
That's fantastic. And I loved how you framed it as responsibility as an honor. And that's something that I want to like give myself a little mantra to remind myself as well. So thank you for that. Another question was about if the youth board members are paid.
No, that's something that they're hoping the fundraising committee can secure in the coming year is figuring out a way to expand our partnerships or our programming in a way that would provide an incentive or a stipend to our NIFSA board members. But up until now, they have not been paid. They did get to participate at our annual membership meeting, which we scholarshiped their travel to attend so that they could have an in-person meeting and to serve as youth leadership, or youth leaders, and to present at the national conference last year.
Awesome, thank you. And then we have one more question here, and then we'll bring in Kristen for a broader discussion. So Carly is asking, what are some NIFSA participation opportunities that tribal governments can access that they may not be doing already?
That is a wonderful question. One thing that organizations or tribal governments have been helping us with over the past couple of years is hosting or sponsoring regional youth leadership development opportunities, which really is kind of us casting a net out there to bring in some more talent into this hub and to share our opportunities with. Really, any way that a tribal government can support or stand behind the work that we're doing, we're happy to not only share our network as the IAC with youth, but with tribal governments as well. So reach out to us, give us a call, shoot us an email, and we'll figure out how we can work to share our resources to uplift the youth in your communities as well.
Awesome, thank you. Well, let's bring Kristen back in and broaden up our discussion. I'm just going to do a quick reminder of how you can enter in questions. So there is that questions module in your control panel. Just type it right in there. You can direct it to one of the presenters or just have it be a general question. So I know there were a couple that I had flagged that I think are relevant for both of you, and really, you know, a couple of questions about how do you get started? I think both in engaging youth in leadership and also adopting shared leadership models. You know, maybe we could hear just, you know, from both of you, like how your advice to organizations that are interested in engaging youth or adopting a shared leadership model.
Kristen, would you like to
Kristen,
go
you
first?
want to take it first?
Sure. Yeah, so whenever I came into our organization, obviously we had shared leadership to begin with, right? So I came into an organization that was structured that way and set up. I think it takes intention and commitment if you want to jump into it. And I think one thing that can be a stumbling block for, in addition to, right, the inherent ability to be able to be okay with messiness and be flexible, as Kelsey mentioned. One, there's the board that you have to deal with if you're a nonprofit, and two is funding and funders. So those are two issues that could potentially be problematic. We have been fantastically lucky enough to have an amazing board who, based on our history and you know, our organizational history, that trust us and work with us to figure all of these things out. And we also have a fantastic kind of backbone organizational support funder who is very comfortable and supportive of shared leadership, which I know isn't always the case. So I think doing your research and making the case for why shared leadership is good, everything from burnout and mental health and staff wellness to legal issues, with, you know, and all these perceived issues that aren't actually issues, and just making a case for that and making sure you have the right team to do it. Somebody had asked if, you know, you could pick like any 3 or 4 people and throw them into a room and you can do shared leadership. Maybe, but maybe not. So it's really relationship dependent. It depends on who is in the room and whether or not they're willing to do the work.
Thank you. Kelsey, thoughts on how to get started?
Yeah, so our public relations director, Danita, was addressing our youth a couple of events ago, and she mentioned how this generation of youth was kind of being titled Generation Y, but she alluded to the fact that instead maybe they should be Generation Why Not. And I think what you'll notice when you interact with youth right now is they do ask that question a lot, why not? And that's something that we hope our youth development opportunities will equip them with the desire to ask, because there is a lot of institutionalized or structural organizations that don't make sense. And the question should be asked, you know, why or why not? Why does it have to be that way? I guess I would challenge organizations that are working to dive into youth or pull youth into their programming. You know, can a youth fill that role? Can you hire some interns to work on that youth-led movement of getting your youth involved or expanding into the realm of youth development? And if they can't fill that role, why not? What needs to be changed within your organizational structure so that you can uplift the youth? Because a youth-led movement is going to far and wide excel beyond anything else that can be established.
Great, thank you. There were a couple of questions about like resources, especially around like having those tough conversations. I know, Kristen, you really spoke about, you know, being willing to have uncomfortable conversations, and, you know, curious if there are any resources or tools that you use to support staff in really adopting and embodying that culture within the organization. And also, Kelsey, if y'all have found any resources to really help promote, you know, even something as simple as you said, like stop calling them kids, but anything else around languaging and support resources that you might share with our listeners today.
Yeah, for sure. So for shared leadership, there have been a few things that came out, resources around that, especially in the Nonprofit Quarterly. I know they have at least 5 articles in just the past couple of years that really delve into the ins and outs, and as much as you can, and different aspects around shared leadership. For language on equity and all of these conversations that might be difficult to have, there's a fantastic nonprofit blog that I'm going to plug because I love and read constantly. We have very highly pressed our staff to read this as well. It's the nonprofitaf.com blog. It's amazing. It's Vu Lee writes it from Rainier Valley Corps, and there's so many resources and great language, and it covers so many topics from equity, nonprofits in general and how they operate, diversity and leadership. It really touches on all of these topics that I think are really poignant and very timely. And it's a ton of fun to read. And so I think just starting there, and then there are also, a lot of organizations who are doing the really heavy lifting and the work of figuring out what it means and being a nonprofit or working in the food system and figuring that out. Just a couple, I'll name a couple, even though there's so many I can think of. One is Soulfire Farm, right? Talking about Black landowners and Black farming and what that means and reparations. And they have a lot of fantastic work that they're doing. And then also they HEAL, the School of Political Leadership, who one of our staff is one of the participants in the first School of Political Leadership. And they have a lot of great content and ideas about what it means whenever we're talking about equity in the food system, and tons more, but those are just a couple.
Thanks so much for mentioning Nonprofit AF. And if y'all aren't familiar with the Happy Hour, they also have a Facebook group called Nonprofit Happy hour, and you've got to be, engaged in a nonprofit in some way to join that group. But it is an amazing archive and resource of, I think there's like 15,000 members or more, and some really dynamic conversations that happen there. So definitely encourage people to tap into that resource. How about for you, Kelsey? Anything that you would share out with folks in terms of resources that y'all are using?
Yeah, I guess the realm in which I exist is a little bit different because I only engage with Native youth. So what I get to experience is when these Native youth come together in a setting that is entirely open to so many cultures, to being present and being appropriately aware of all of those cultures. It's kind of a beautiful setting, and it doesn't really present a whole lot of room for discrepancies as far as equity that I see. However, we do have to really present opportunity for them to understand how to navigate the non-Native world, because it's not always in a setting like that where they're going to have an employer that is aware of the cultural references that they may make or things like that. So really what I think the best thing that we tap into is just developing that network for them to engage with other youth that are like-minded, that have similar cultural teachings, or who have similar aspirations in the future as to what they hope to accomplish and do for their community.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, as you were speaking about the allied events, I was inspired for us to talk together about bringing your crew into one of the Food Systems Leadership Network convenings, because we're dreaming up a full membership gathering next year. So it'd be really cool to explore that with y'all. So both of you really talked a lot about communications and just how key communication is, both in managing a national network, and youth who are working at all these different levels, and also within the shared leadership model with cross-functional teams, and just a lot of different kinds of engagement happening there. So curious what kinds of tools are working well for internal communication. Kelsey, you had touched a little bit on just what pros the youth are, so maybe you could share a little bit of what you've gleaned from them, and how you're seeing internal communications really working within NIFSA.
Yeah, I think the internal communications are successful, again, because of that flexibility. Like the youth board has a Snapchat group to send pictures back and forth. And in that sense, and that I think is very important for an organization, to have communication with the team members in your organization that goes beyond the workplace. So the youth board, they're a group of friends that are constantly patting each other on their back, clapping, standing in the corner, supporting each other whenever there's some good that somebody has done. And I think that really helps develop a level of, it sets the tone for a good working environment. So I think flexibility is key. Carrying on that relationship beyond the workplace is also helpful when it comes to communication. And also, sometimes I think we have to let go of the preconceived notion that like a conference call once a week is the most beneficial setting in order for us to get things done. In some instances that structure may work, in others it's not going to. So you really just have to figure out what works for your organization and what's enjoyable for the people within your organization to take part in. Because if your weekly staff get together is something that is not enjoyable for everybody, it's not going to really set the best tone for the work week.
Great, thank you. Kristen?
Yeah, I would just reiterate the last, especially of what Kelsey said. There's no fantastic, magical answer to how to do this well. Like you can't use like Asana or Airtable and it's going to solve all of your communication issues, right? Like it just doesn't work. And so we have our mostly weekly leadership meetings, okay? And even that, right? Like mostly, sometimes we don't, sometimes we have more than once a week. We don't have regularly scheduled staff meetings. We've tried various iterations of things. We've tried, every 2 weeks we'll have a 30-minute standing staff meeting and everybody will just share quick updates so everybody's on the same page. We go through ebbs and flows of communication. Sometimes we need a lot of context and people will be going back and forth to offices, and we'll be having a lot going on. Sometimes people need space, and so it'll be very different. So I think being comfortable with being flexible can be really, really difficult for some people. You want to have like a few perfect answers, and I love Excel and Airtable. I like have these tools that I love to use, but not everybody does. So being okay with not having a perfect answer and just being able to read like the context of your staff and your organization is much more important than any one tool or like meeting schedule, I think.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, there's a couple of questions here for you, and I think because it goes back to that 3. How do you deal with disagreement when there's maybe 2 in agreement and 1 is not?
It's a lot of talking. We haven't had a case come up when somebody has just been like, this is the most horrible idea ever. I'm gonna, there have been times where we have had disagreements and I don't think this is right, but you two think it is, and you know more than I do about this, so you're gonna go ahead and do it. It's so far, right, hasn't been such an issue that we couldn't come to at least mostly a consensus on. I say mostly consensus, right? Because we have had instances where you're like, okay, if you two think that's fine, or you all think that's what we need to do, that'll be fine. I have plenty of other stuff to do. Like it's a lot of that is born out of trust and being willing to communicate. It's a lot of work, honestly, to get to that place. But yeah, it's a lot of talking is what it is.
Thank you. One of the things that we had talked about in one of our conversations leading up to this that you both had mentioned is just how important it is in both of your organizations to really get clear on roles and responsibilities, and just really emphasizing that point about clarifying roles. And I'm curious to ask, how do you actually do that? Like, who is clarifying the role, and who then agrees upon that role as it's described after it's been clarified?
Sure. It's funny because I'm thinking as I'm talking about this, I'm like, yes, both are true, right? Because you have to have clarity, and then you also have to have flexibility and the ability to change quickly and adapt, which I think makes clarity even more important. So among like the co-directors, for example, we sit and we discuss, okay, this is what needs to get done. Who's, wearing what hats, what's shared and I say this, we're not perfect at it by any means. We go back and forth about, that's a long list of shared responsibilities that we have. And some of us have a much deeper and broader grounding in food systems or in financial management than the others. And so we've had conversations to figure out, well, if somebody's carrying a heavier load here, but less here, right? Like, does it even out and does it make sense? So it's not something that we're perfect at by any means, but it's something that we're always striving to get towards. Because we do shared leadership across the organization, roles and responsibilities for each person's job is really decided upon by, for example, with our program managers, it'll be one of the co-directors or 2 of the co-directors and the program manager talking through what that person is doing, what they're taking on, what they want to do, what they're interested in, where they see their program headed, and then the same right with the assistants and whoever else is on our staff. Because it really is like shared leadership at all levels, and it all looks a little bit different, right? Like the decisions that program assistants are making are different than the decisions co-directors are making, but it's still there. So yeah, it's kind of a give and take and a constant reevaluation of those things.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an iterative process. And Kelsey, I'm curious for y'all, because it's still very much in the formation phase, right? And so there's, I would imagine, quite a bit of clarification around roles. So how do y'all handle that?
There's a Google document that has things added to it weekly or monthly whenever there's more meetings. And as we continue to discover new roles of a young nonprofit youth-led organization, we have to sort of reassign the roles and figure out where does this level of public relations fall under. Should it go to the website committee to be responsible for, or is that something that the public relations committee should be responsible for? Are those two committees the same thing? Will they become one at one point? You know, it's again, having the flexibility to bob and weave as you need to make it all fit. I do have to give a hats off to the current chairwoman, Carleen. She does a phenomenal job of repeating after assignments are given out. Okay, just to follow up, Cindy, you are going to do this, and your role this month, Zachary, is. And she really does a phenomenal job of making sure and reiterating what she understands so that there is that clarity that is really important that Kristen was talking about earlier.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, we're coming up at the top of the hour here. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for another hour. It's really fascinating. Just really want to appreciate both of you so much for sharing your insight and expertise with us today. And I want to ask you each to just leave a couple parting words with our participants. Maybe just, you know, final words of advice and encouragement to those out there listening who are maybe thinking about adopting some of the practices that you've shared with us today. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I think it's, I think I've kind of pounded the point home that it is hard work. It's a different kind of work, but it's very much worth it. I think, you know, we're trying to change these systems. A lot of times we're talking about equity and we're talking about systemic issues. If we need to change the systems, then we also need to evaluate how we're operating as a system and what that means. And so I think working on shared leadership and figuring that out is an incredibly important piece of that, and it's very, very much worth it. The peace of mind and the friendships and the trust and the amazingness that comes out of, you know, these women that I get to work with is just mind-boggling and fantastic. And so I think if you're thinking about it, try it. I think it's well worth the effort, and I think it's the only way that we're going to move towards having new systems that work for, you know, communities of color or other communities to figure these things out and really address these systemic issues.
Awesome, thank you. Kelsey?
Yeah, so I guess my parting words, I absolutely encourage you to try to get youth leadership involved with your organization. They carry the energy and the excitement and the passion that it takes to, on those days when, like you mentioned earlier, Kristen, you're just not in it. It's not going to be a good day for you. You're not going to have, you know, youth have the ability to zap you out of it, and they have the ability to kind of remind you every once in a while, hey, you're working for a good cause here. Don't get discouraged because today didn't go your way. You know, remember tomorrow's a new day and there are people counting on you. It can be really tiring running into so many roadblocks in this sector of work. And I think that the more we get our youth involved, not only does it equip us with the skills or the energy to get through the day, but it also equips them with a supportive structure to assist them through those first few heartbreaks of getting let down, and shows them that it's going to be all right. We're going to work through it. There's a roadblock, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the road. We just got to find a different way to get over it. If there's ever any way that our organization can share more to assist yours, please feel free to reach out. Do not hesitate.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to close out. Thank you all so much for your contribution today, and to all of our participants. And please join us in 2 weeks for the third and final webinar in this series, which will be examining collaboratives, alliances, and networks for systems change. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day and see you soon. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.